Today I'm going to share how I made Larry the Lokhust Lord with all of his weapon options and of course his pet scarab, Sid. It's coming right up.
Necrons!
Nick speaking and welcome to this video. Right, today I'm making a Lokhust Lord from the Lokhust Heavy Destroyer kit because Games Workshop didn't give us a Lokhust Lord model. Actually, they didn't give us any Lokhust Destroyers at all, apart from the Heavy Destroyer kit. So, we're going to base our conversion on this miniature. Now here is my old model, the Destroyer Lord, as it was then, and I've magnetised mine on the base. And I've started building this new miniature. I started off with the bottom half. I built all of the body, but I didn't glue the miniature to the actual base. My plan is to make the base look slightly different than, well, the other miniatures in this range, because after all it's a push fit miniature. I'm just going to leave the miniature where it connects to the base, not glued. It pushes in and out quite nicely. Potentially, if it does break, I might magnetise it, but at this stage I'm just going to leave it as it is. Now these actually go over the top of these vents, and I felt that they covered up the vents so much that you probably wouldn't see much of the gold. So I had this little idea of turning these vents around. I thought that might actually help. Now, of course, they are designed to go in one particular way, but they still fit the opposite way, and with a bit of glue I think they will still work, and it does expose that vent a little bit more, and I was thinking it would make it a little different from the Heavy Destroyer. Now I am giving myself quite an open area just where the body is, but I think that will still be okay once it's all painted gold. So that was my plan so far. Then I went to my bits box. First I sieved through all of the bits and just brought out anything which I thought may be useful in this conversion. As you can see from the table here, there's quite a few bits and pieces. We've got a number of different staffs. I've got some basing material which I potentially might use, and I've got an Overlord miniature there. Now this Overlord miniature you've seen in a previous conversion of mine. It's quite badly painted and quite badly glued together. Now I've got this little scarab, and I've had this for quite some time. It's a 3D printed one. I was thinking of maybe trying to use that or some other basing material on the base itself. I was also looking at what I could do to make this guy just look totally different. I've got these 3D printed pieces, and I thought maybe this might look pretty cool on the front of the miniature somehow, but I wasn't quite sure. I just sort of getting ideas at this stage, so nothing set, just having a look to see what could work, what couldn't work. Now I'm looking for one piece particular here. It's actually from the Void Dragon. I will find it in a minute, I promise. And when I do find it, you'll see that it is the Necron symbol, which I've saved from that conversion. I wasn't quite sure what I was going to use it on, but potentially it might look pretty cool on the front of this miniature right there. So we'll see if I use that later in the video. I was also thinking about the back section of this miniature, again just trying to make it look a little different from the Heavy Destroyers, and I found these pieces. I'm not 100% sure where they're from, but I was thinking I could potentially cut off the section which is already there, maybe glue this piece into place, which you can't see because I've got it off camera. Anyway, that was my first port of call, just to have a look at all of these miniatures and see what I could do. Now I bought myself a cheap Overlord and Indomitus Lord from eBay. My plan was maybe to use one of the torsos in this miniature and also give me some more weapon options, because at this stage I was planning on magnetising the arms. In the end I decided the Overlord bodies were just a bit too small, so I decided to make this conversion using the original Lokhust Heavy Destroyer body itself. So then I had a look at some of the weapon options available to me, just trying to work out which arm I'm going to use holding which weapons. Now, of course, the original miniature actually has two left arms because of the way it holds the gun. So I was considering, shall I maybe green stuff in one of the holes and then just have two weapons, or potentially even go for 3 arms. I just spent some time eyeing up all of the options available to me, just working out how some of the bits might look when they were glued together, and just generally having a good think. Now, before I could glue it together, I had to work out what I was going to do with these arms. As I said, originally I was going to magnetise them, but I felt that these newer miniatures, where they're quite skinny in their joints, they didn't really bode too well for magnetising, so I thought of maybe a different option, and that would be interchangeable staffs but on the same hand. So what I decided to do was to glue the right arm into his body and then cut his hand off, and then glue one of the staffs onto his hand, and then make the actual staff head itself interchangeable. I was thinking of maybe doing a little pin on the head. So I just cut the hand off of the arm and then just made sure that was nice and flat. However, the forearm was very thick, and I felt with the hand on there it just looked really silly. So I also decided to shave down the forearm. So I just scraped the plastic away very carefully, keeping the shape, but just removing the bulk of that plastic. I also used a little file to file down the plastic, but most of this work was done with the knife, just carefully, gradually shaving down the plastic. Okay, so I've shaved down the arm now, and when I put the warsight into place, the hand actually looks part of the arm. It's all to scale. Now I was thinking of cutting the top half of this staff off and then pinning the top so that I can interchange between the Staff of Light and the warsight, and I thought that would work quite well. Now the original staff has a little damage on the bottom of it, so I was thinking of cutting off the original staff at the bottom and then using the Staff of Light's bottom half and replacing my warsight with that. Not only will that solve my issue of a broken staff at the bottom there, but it will make that staff look totally different from the other miniature that I used this staff on. So I cut the bottom half of the staff off, and then I cut both top halves off of the two different staffs, and then I just used my knife and made sure they were nice and flush. So those are the pieces nicely done, and of course I'm not using my brand new warsight from this kit now, I'm using my old one. So what I need to do is strip the paint off. I'm going to use BioStrip 20. Now, as far as I'm aware, you can't buy this in the USA for some reason, but in the UK it's easily available and it works perfectly. It's very quick. It took me 1 hour to strip the paint off. It doesn't smell and it isn't harmful to your skin. So I definitely would recommend this. So as I said, I soaked it for an hour and then I used a toothbrush and I just got all of the paint off, and we are ready for pinning. I'm using a 1mm drill bit. So I started by drilling the shaft itself. I was very careful here, there isn't much wiggle room. I made sure I was drilling right in the middle, and actually I drilled quite deep into the shaft because the shaft itself goes into a thicker piece of plastic, and I wanted to drill all the way down into that thicker plastic. So when I put the pin in, the pin's in the thicker section, much less chance of it breaking that way. Now you can use your drill piece to actually measure how far the hole goes down. So just put the drill piece in, use your finger, take the drill piece out, and you can measure how far the hole actually goes in. Now we're going to use a paper clip for our actual pin. I'm just going to clip that down with my little clippers, get that to a reasonable length. We want a nice straight pin, and we're going to super glue that pin into the hole. Okay, so I've glued the bottom half of the staff. I didn't actually pin that, so there was no need, but the pin in the top half is now dry, and I've drilled some holes out in the tops of the staff. So now those two pieces go into the pin and I've got an interchangeable staff. Now I've also drilled a hole into the hand on the staff and also into the wrist on the arm, and I put a little pin in there. That is drying, and now we're ready to assemble the body. However, before I glue anything together, I need to cut off the head section because I'm going to use a brand new head. So just cut that off, and then I'm going to glue most of this together with the exception of the front of the torso. Right, glued together, and I've glued the right arm into position. The staff itself, I'm going to wait until it's on the body before I actually glue that into position, just so I can work out exactly what angle I want it to be. So now I was ready to work out what to do with the left arm stroke arms. Now the original Destroyer Lord only had 2 arms, so in my head when I first started to do this conversion, that's what I was going to do. But the more I thought about it, the more I thought, well, maybe I should just do 2 arms. I mean, it's a Lokhust miniature. The Lokhust Heavy Destroyers have 2 arms, so maybe the Lord would as well. I mean, after all, the Scorpex have 3 legs, so why not 3 arms on the Lokhust miniature? So I was thinking, if I use the original arm, which obviously just fits into the armpit very nicely, and then I cut off the hand, I could potentially give this guy a void blade. I thought that would be pretty cool. He would be using it almost like a shield more than a weapon, but I thought that could work quite well. And then with the other arm, I have this old school Heavy Destroyer arm, which I just had randomly in my bits box. And I thought it would be pretty cool to maybe bring some of the old school miniature to this new conversion, and that would make a second cool looking arm. However, not just sort of hanging in the air, I was going to give this arm a resurrection orb. Now I've got these little ball bearings which I use for resurrection orbs. I've used them over the years quite often, and I've got this quite nice big one here which fits in his hand pretty well. So I decided that would be the direction that I would go. Okay, so I cut it at the wrist and I put the void blade on, and I've glued his other arm into place. I've now put the torso into position because we've got both of those arms in there, and I've glued the resurrection orb into the hand of this miniature. Now I'm not going to glue this arm into place again until I finish the whole conversion and I know exactly where I want to actually position it. So now I need to work on a head. I've got this head here from the Lichguard kit which looks okay, but I was thinking, how about using the original Lord's head from that old miniature, because well, it looks quite regal and I think it would match the conversion well. So I put it into place and the little neck veins fit absolutely perfectly. I thought I'm definitely going to use this head, but first I had to biostrip it. Okay, so head is stripped and glued into place, and then things got a little crazy. So crazy I actually forgot to record. So obviously at this stage I'm thinking to myself, I've got most of the weapon options on this miniature. I've got the Warside, the Staff of Light, which is interchangeable, and then I've got the Resurrection Orb on there. I've actually got the Void Shield, so why not have a Hyperphase Sword? However, I got a little carried away with this section and I forgot to film anything. My creative juices were just flowing so much that I just sort of carried on working without recording anything. So I have taken some pictures, so this is what I did. Now my original idea whilst making this Hyperphase Sword was to have it on the top of the staff. However, I didn't have any Hyperphase Swords in my bits box, so I had to make one. I took a Warside from the Lichguard kit and I cut off the little orb. I had a look at some pictures of what a Hyperphase Sword looks like, and it looked very similar to having a Gauss weapon where that little ball is. So yeah, I cut that off, and then I got a Gauss Flayer from my bits box because of course all of my warriors have Reapers, and I cut the little weapon section out. And then I cut it down and I glued it where the orb was. I also cut the little fins off the end of the gun so that it sort of all matched together quite well. However, this looked rather silly on top of the staff. It just looked like a Warside. It didn't look like a Hyperphase Sword at all. So what I did is I made a little hand grip for it just from the staff from the Lichguard kit. And then I finished that section off with another piece from the Gauss Flayer. Then I had my Hyperphase Sword, but of course designed to go into a hand. So I came up with the idea of removing the Resurrection Orb from the Destroyer arm and then actually adding this Hyperphase Sword to that arm. Now I managed to take the orb off with no trouble at all. However, the Hyperphase Sword handle just didn't sit very well in his hand. What I successfully did is I bent all of the fingers, and I managed to get the hand fitting quite nicely around the sword. However, I couldn't get the thumb to fit very nicely. And what I should have done is cut the thumb off and moved it around. However, I decided to bend it, and as I bent it, it broke, and then the fingers broke, and I had no hand left. I had to look in my bits box for an alternative. I had nothing. And then I thought to myself, well, hang on. Scorpec destroyers have no hands. Their weapons are actually attached to their arm. So I thought, well, why can't this just be attached to the arm? No hands. So I cut the hand right off where I thought visually it would work as a connection piece to the actual staff. And then I found another little section on the bottom of an offcut from this kit, and I cut that off, and I thought I could use that piece on the opposite side of the staff, just glue it into place. So I'd solved my issue here with the Hyperphase sword. However, now I'd lost my Resurrection Orb, and now the miniature has all of the weapon options available to it, not necessarily interchangeable. He's holding most of them, and I thought, well, I just can't have it without a Resurrection Orb. Now, I have done a conversion previously many years ago where I had a little scarab holding the Resurrection Orb on the base of the miniature, and I thought that could work well with this miniature because I've got that 3D scarab, so I could have the scarab holding the actual Resurrection Orb. Okay, so that's the Hyperphase sword all glued together and looking pretty cool. I'm not going to glue it into the body. I'm going to leave it off for painting purposes. I'm going to paint it first and then glue it. So now I'm going to have another look at the bottom half of the miniature. As I said right at the beginning, I was going to cut off the back section and replace it with this. I'm not sure where this is from, to be honest. If you know, let me know in the comments box below. I'm going to use my usual trick of some blue tack on top of a paint pot to cushion the cut. So I'm going to just cut that back section off, just file it, make sure it's nice and flat. Then I'm going to cut the back section of the replacement piece and just glue it into position. Right, there we go, and I've got the side pieces in place. They're not glued. Again, I'm going to paint it first before I glue those. But now the miniature's looking quite different from the Heavy Destroyer, with both the rotation of the side sections and of course with the change at the back there. Now, I didn't waste the section which I cut off of the back because I made a little hole and used it as a pin for the staff. My idea is, if I'm using the Hyperphase sword or the Void blade as the main weapon, well, then I can put this section on the top of the staff to replace the Warsai or Staff of Light. So I can make it as WYSIWYG as I can. Okay, so now I had another look at the front of the miniature. I put the pieces which I had into place just to see which looked the best, and I decided that the Necron symbol from the Void Dragon looked super cool in this spot. So I had to cut the little joining section at the bottom of the symbol just to make it the right shape to fit the body, but I was able to do that, glued it into position, and I thought it looked really cool. Now, looking at the base again, when I put the miniature into position, I just felt there wasn't quite enough room for Sid the Scarab to sit there. When I put him into position, it all seems sort of squashed up. Now, the original Destroyer Lord is of course on a flying base, and I thought, well, how about I put this miniature on a flying base as well, just to give me a little bit more room for Sid the Scarab. So I got a little flying base stem. I just experimented here. This was the only stem that I could find. Ideally, I want to find a stem without an air bubble in, so I'll have to go through my bits box again for that. But it looks like this could work. I'd have to drill out a hole into the base section and of course then cut the piece which is on the actual model itself and drill a hole out there. It nearly fit in, but not quite, so I'd have to drill out a hole. I had to drill out a 3mm hole into that section, and the plastic stem just pushed into place really nicely. So now I had to fix it to the body. So what I did is I cut off the little stem on the top of the flying base. That's a section which always breaks anyway. The idea is to drill a hole into the destroyer body so that I could push the whole section of the flying base stem into the body. Now potentially, if I'd thought about this conversion earlier, I probably would have put the stem into the middle of the destroyer body, but I've got obviously that base section now glued to the back, so I'm just going to put the stem at the back anyway. It will be slightly different to the usual concept of using a flying base. However, from the front of the miniature it may look better because you won't be able to see that stem quite as much. So that's what I did. I cut the original pieces of plastic off of the destroyer body and then I drilled a big hole in there. And now I've got my destroyer body in place. It's very secure. A nice big hole pushes right into the stem and it doesn't go anywhere, so I was really happy with this. So now all I had to do was glue the torso onto the body. Obviously I'm not going to glue those side sections, I'll just put them into place so you can see the final conversion. And of course I need to glue on Sid. And here he is, all finished. I'm probably going to add some more basing material to the base just to beef it out a little bit. But of course I've got all of the weapon options, which is really nice to have. Not necessarily all interchangeable. He's holding most of the weapon options, but of course the main weapon is probably going to be the war sai, but in the future if the Staff of Light becomes the best weapon, I've got that weapon option. And of course, worst case scenario, I've got a Void Blade and a Hyperphase sword on there. Obviously Games Workshop will release an actual miniature one day for the Lokhust Lord. We have no idea what that's going to be like, but for now I've got my converted one and I'm very happy with it. If you want to see some of my other Necron conversions that I've done, here's a playlist for you to watch next.